The rain tapped against the roof, a slow, steady drumbeat that seemed almost alive, echoing the uneasy rhythm of my heartbeat. I had always loved the sound of rain. Not today. Tonight, the drizzle felt like the world itself was warning me, whispering that things were lurking just beyond the dim glow of the streetlight outside my window. It was the kind of night where shadows grew taller, where every reflection in a puddle seemed to twitch on its own. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, just the rain. But deep down, I knew better. The stories I was about to tell you tonight are not for the faint of heart, not for those who seek comfort in logic or reason. These are the tales of true terror, the kind that makes you question what you think you know about the world. Our first story begins with a man named Eric, a night shift security guard for a small rural hospital. Rain had been falling steadily for hours. The kind of rain that turns parking lots into glassy mirrors and makes every distant sound echo like it's right behind you. Eric had grown used to working the graveyard shift alone, the monotony broken only by the occasional emergency alert or the patter of water against the windows. But that night, he noticed something unusual. A light in the hospital's old wing flickered repeatedly. Long after maintenance had confirmed all electrical systems were secure. Eric walked down the deserted hallways, each step absorbed by the soaked carpet, the smell of rain and antiseptic mixing into something almost tangible. Then he saw it. A shadow, just at the edge of the corner where the old nurse's station once stood. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. It shifted too quickly, moving in ways a person couldn't. And yet, there was an unmistakable presence, a sense that it was watching, waiting. He froze, breath caught in his chest, and then, as if the world had decided to test his nerves, the shadow vanished. The next day, the maintenance log would show nothing out of the ordinary. But Eric knew what he had seen. And he wasn't the only one. Just miles away, in a small town surrounded by dense woods, a couple named Mark and Lisa were out hiking. The rain had started in the afternoon, a gentle drizzle that soon turned into sheets of water, soaking through their jackets and turning the trail into a slippery mess of mud and leaves. They had been exploring for hours, hoping to find the old creek that Mark remembered from childhood trips. As the rain intensified, they noticed something strange. Footprints appeared in the mud where they had just walked. Not just their own, but deeper, wider, irregular imprints that seemed almost animalistic, but upright. Mark laughed it off, saying it must be someone else on the trail. But Lisa felt a creeping unease settle in her chest. They pressed on, but with each step, the prints continued, always ahead of them, always just at the edge of vision. By the time they reached the abandoned cabin they had intended to use as a waypoint, the rain was torrential. They took shelter inside, listening to the storm pounding against the roof, the strange footprints ceasing just outside the cracked wooden door. They would later swear that through the heavy rainfall, they could hear breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from the darkened woods beyond the window. It was not human, or at least not entirely, and it waited until they were asleep to make its presence known. Back in the city, a man named Thomas was driving home late one evening, the windshield wipers working overtime to clear the rain that had turned the streets into slick ribbons of light. He had chosen a shortcut through a seldom used industrial area, the kind of place where street lights sputter and alleys disappear into black voids. As he drove, a figure appeared on the side of the road, soaked to the bone, a silhouette against the pale reflection of neon signs on the wet asphalt. Thomas slowed, intending to offer help, but the figure didn't move toward him. Instead, it stepped into the middle of the road, blocking him completely. He honked, expecting the person to move, but the figure remained still, head tilted unnaturally to one side, watching. Thomas felt a cold dread settle over him. Something was wrong. The figure's reflection in the water pooling on the asphalt was wrong. It didn't align with its form. Every muscle, every shadow, distorted in ways that no human body could manage. He slammed the accelerator, tires skidding, heart hammering, and when he looked back in the rearview mirror, the figure was gone. No footprints, no sign it had ever existed. Just the rain, now heavier than ever, pounding against his car like a relentless drumbeat of warning. Meanwhile, in a remote farmhouse, a young woman named Clara had returned to care for her grandmother, who lived alone at the edge of a forest. Rain had begun in the late afternoon, drumming against the old tin roof and seeping through the cracked windows. Clara had always felt uneasy in the house, but tonight, that unease deepened. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when she heard a faint whisper, almost drowned out by the storm. Clara. It was soft, too soft to be certain, and she told herself it was the wind. But then it came again, closer this time, and she realized it was not outside, but inside. She dropped the knife, heart racing, and the whisper became a low hum, as if the walls themselves were speaking. Her grandmother, who had been napping, did not stir. Clara's instincts told her to leave, but her curiosity held her in place, and she moved through the hallway slowly. The lights flickered with the storm, shadows stretching unnaturally, reaching for her like long cold fingers. She saw the rocking chair in the living room move slightly, though her grandmother was asleep. The whispering stopped abruptly, leaving her in a silence so deep it pressed against her eardrums. The rain continued, relentless and deafening. But inside the house, something had shifted, as if the storm had awakened it. And then there was the story of the old hospital wing, long abandoned but still standing, where a nurse named Jenna had volunteered. The rain turned the broken windows into mirrors, reflecting the remnants of beds and ivy stands left behind. She had been assigned to check the wing for artifacts for the hospital museum project. But as she walked through the corridors, she felt an oppressive presence. Machines, long unplugged, began to beep faintly, one by one. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to curl and twist unnaturally around her. She told herself it was her imagination, yet the feeling persisted, growing heavier with each step. At one point, a wheelchair rolled slowly down the hallway by itself, stopping just short of her feet. Jenna froze, unable to breathe, as a low, guttural hum began somewhere behind her. She ran, slipping in the rain-soaked entrance hall, heart hammering, and did not stop until she reached the outside. Gasping for air as the storm tore at her clothes and hair. And even then, she could not shake the feeling that something had followed her, something that had been waiting in the rain all along. Rain has a way of amplifying fear. It blurs boundaries, turns shadows into phantoms, and makes every sound, a distant car, a dripping gutter, a creaking floorboard, into a potential harbinger of terror. The people in these stories were ordinary, yet ordinary had no defense against the extraordinary. There is something about being wet, about the chill that seeps into your bones, that makes your mind more susceptible to suggestion. Something about the endless rhythm of water falling from the sky that draws out hidden fears, feeding them until they grow into a presence you cannot ignore. In each of these tales, rain is not just a backdrop. It is a character, an accomplice, a warning that the world you know is fragile, and that what waits beyond the edge of light does not obey rules. And still, despite the fear, there is a strange beauty in it. The contrast of ordinary life and extraordinary terror. The juxtaposition of a calm storm with heart-stopping moments of dread creates a tension that is almost magnetic. It makes you, the listener, lean closer, involuntarily gripping the edge of your seat, listening to the cadence of each drop, imagining the world outside your window turned into a stage for the unexplainable. That is why these stories persist, whispered in the dark, retold over and over, each telling a little different, a little worse. Because terror is not static. It evolves with the mind that experiences it. The rain hadn't let up for hours, and by the time Lucas left his apartment to check on his car, the streets were rivers, reflecting the dim yellow of flickering streetlights. He lived in a neighborhood where old trees lined the sidewalks, their branches heavy and dripping, creating dark, twisting shapes on the wet asphalt. As he unlocked the car, he noticed footprints in the shallow puddles. Not his own, not anyone he knew. They led down the sidewalk and then abruptly disappeared, as if the person who made them had simply vanished into thin air. Lucas hesitated. Something about the pattern of the prints, uneven, a jerking slightly, as though the person was stumbling or running, made his stomach twist. He told himself it was probably someone else seeking shelter from the rain. But the feeling of being watched, of eyes following him, was undeniable. Every instinct screamed to get inside. Yet he lingered, drawn inexplicably forward, as though the rain itself was guiding him towards something he didn't want to see. Further north, in a sleepy town bordered by marshlands, Sarah, a wildlife photographer, was out on assignment during a steady downpour. She loved capturing animals in their natural environment, and the rain had a way of bringing out behaviors she rarely saw in the dry season. That night, she stumbled upon an abandoned cabin at the edge of the forest, water streaming down its weathered walls. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a room untouched by human hands for decades. Dust danced in the dim light of her flashlight, swirling with the rainwater dripping through the roof. She moved slowly, her boots leaving wet prints across the wooden floor. And then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of breathing, shallow and deliberate, coming from the corner. She froze, heart pounding, and shined her flashlight toward the source. The beam revealed nothing but shadows. Yet the sound continued, now behind her, then in front, circling in a rhythm that made her head spin. She bolted out of the cabin, rain soaking her hair and clothes. The echo of the breathing lingering long after she left the forest behind. Meanwhile, in a coastal town, the storm had escalated into a relentless downpour. Waves crashing against the seawall, in sync with the rain's drumming. Jonathan, a lifeguard who had long since retired from patrolling the beaches, had returned to check on the old lighthouse where he used to work. The structure was rumored to be haunted, abandoned decades ago. Yet, he felt a strange pull to revisit it during the storm. As he climbed the spiral staircase, water trickled through the cracked windows, creating eerie patterns on the worn steps. At the top, he looked out at the grey churning sea, the horizon indistinct in the downpour. That's when he felt it. A sudden chill that was not caused by the wind. A weight pressing down on his shoulders as though someone had just entered the room behind him. Turning quickly, he saw the doorway empty. The faint echo of a whisper, indistinguishable but urgent, seemed to vibrate through the metal of the lighthouse. The storm outside raged, yet inside, an unnatural stillness had fallen, and Jonathan realized he was not alone. Something had been waiting for the perfect moment, and the rain had brought it out. Back in the city, a young man named Daniel lived on the 13th floor of an old apartment building. Rain had been falling steadily for days, drumming against the windows with a relentless rhythm that made sleep impossible. One night, he awoke to the sound of scratching, slow and deliberate, along the wall opposite his bed. At first he thought it was the pipes, the rain causing some anomaly. But the scratching continued, deliberate, almost methodical. He got out of bed and approached the wall, pressing his ear against it. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, "Daniel." His skin prickled, and he stumbled back, heart racing. The rain outside intensified, each drop echoing like a drumbeat in his ears. He tried to convince himself it was a dream, that he was imagining things, but then the scratching returned, this time accompanied by a faint outline forming in the wall itself, a shadowy figure that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Daniel ran to the window, throwing it open to the storm, hoping the cold rain might clear his mind. But the figure remained, staring, waiting, its presence undeniable. In another town, a group of friends had decided to camp near a river, the forecast warning of heavy rain. They arrived late in the evening, setting up tents as the first drops began to fall. The sound of rain on canvas is usually comforting, but that night it felt oppressive, almost suffocating. As darkness fell, the friends huddled around a small fire, telling stories to distract themselves from the storm. Then, from the edge of the woods, a soft tapping began, almost like someone knocking on a tree. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and it seemed to move closer with every tap. The friends laughed nervously, attributing it to the wind, to animals, anything to avoid the uncomfortable truth. Whatever it was approaching them. One of them, curious and foolish, shone a flashlight toward the sound. The beam revealed nothing, yet the tapping persisted, louder now, echoing through the rain-soaked forest. That night, none of them slept. By morning, they discovered deep footprints in the mud around their campsite. Footprints that ended abruptly, as if the being had vanished into thin air, leaving only the lingering chill of fear and rain. Meanwhile, a delivery driver named Mark had been navigating rural roads during a torrential downpour. Visibility was minimal, and the rain created strange optical illusions in the headlights, turning ordinary roadside objects into menacing figures. As he rounded a bend, he noticed a figure standing in the middle of the road, drenched, motionless. He swerved to avoid it, tires hydroplaning on the slick surface, and when he looked back, the figure was gone. Confused, he continued, only to notice the same figure appearing in his rearview mirror at intervals, always just at the edge of visibility. Mark's heart pounded, each raindrop against the windshield sounding like a countdown to something inevitable. When he reached a small deserted gas station, he thought he was safe. But as he stepped out of the car, the rain began to fall harder, and he saw footprints in the mud leading away from the gas pumps. Not just human, but too large, too uneven, suggesting a creature with no right to exist. And though the footprints stopped suddenly, Mark could feel the presence behind him. Cold, patient, watching, waiting. The rain's presence in all these stories is not incidental. It amplifies fear, distorts perception, and isolates its victims. Each drop becomes a metronome for suspense. Each puddle a mirror reflecting more than just the world above it. Shadows deepen, sounds multiply, And ordinary locations, a street, a forest, a room, become arenas for the extraordinary. The wet, cold, relentless rain ensures that no one is safe, that the boundary between the seen and the unseen is blurred. In the hands of fear, rain is more than weather. It is a companion to terror, a reminder that the world is not as simple or as safe as it seems. And yet, in each of these moments, there is a strange intimacy. The rain brings the ordinary and the terrifying together. A contrast that heightens every heartbeat, every sensation. The stories persist because they are not just about fright. They are about human experience, about vulnerability, about the unexplainable piercing the fabric of daily life. Each protagonist is ordinary, but the extraordinary finds them anyway, often in the most mundane settings. And the rain is always present, a relentless witness to the events that follow. Whether it's a shadow moving in a hospital corridor, footprints in mud leading nowhere, or whispers that pierce the silence of a storm, the rain never betrays its presence. It magnifies every moment, every sound, every heartbeat, until the line between reality and fear is almost impossible to discern. The night seemed endless, the rain falling in relentless sheets that turned the streets and forests into a blur of shadow and reflection. Mara, a nurse working at a small rural clinic, had stayed late to finish paperwork, the storm outside hammering against the windows, as if it wanted to warn her of what was coming. She had grown accustomed to working alone during late hours, but tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a pressure that made her stomach churn. As she walked down the empty corridor, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. Every creak of the old floorboards sounded amplified, and the patter of rain against the roof seemed to echo in rhythm with her heartbeat. She paused when she heard the soft sound of dragging footsteps behind her. There was no one there. She turned quickly, heart racing, but the corridor was empty. Mara's rational mind struggled to explain it. The storm, the old building, but the unease clung to her like wet clothes, impossible to shake. Meanwhile, in a small suburban neighborhood, Kevin, a delivery man, was navigating streets flooded from the downpour. His headlights reflected back images that seemed alive. Figures darting in puddles, shadows stretching unnaturally across walls. One particularly narrow alley caught his eye. There, he saw a child, soaked to the bone, standing perfectly still, staring at him with dark, unblinking eyes. Kevin slowed, worried the child might step into the street. But when he blinked and looked again, the figure had vanished. Confused, he parked his van nearby and went to investigate, only to find muddy footprints leading into the alley and stopping abruptly. There was no sign of a child, no indication of where it had gone, only the dripping rain and a cold sense of being watched. Kevin hurried back to his van, trying to convince himself he had imagined it. Yet the unease refused to leave. Every splash of water from passing cars, every gust of wind made his skin crawl. Far from the city, in an old abandoned church, a group of teenagers had taken shelter from the storm. Rain streamed through broken windows, forming puddles across the worn wooden floor. They lit candles, their flickering light barely illuminating the pews and faded murals on the walls. Among them was Daniel, who loved ghost stories and thrill-seeking adventures. As they huddled together, sharing tales to pass the time, a sudden cold draft swept through the church. The candles flickered violently and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The sound of dripping water echoed like a slow heartbeat, each drop resonating unnaturally in the vast, empty space. One of the teens swore they saw movement in the shadows, a figure shifting just beyond the candlelight. Another screamed when a voice whispered their name from the far end of the room, wet and hollow, almost as if carried by the rain itself. Panic set in. They ran for the doors, only to find them stuck, swollen from the moisture. The rain outside was deafening, yet inside, something unseen had trapped them in the darkness, watching and waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. At a remote train station, Alex, a late-night commuter, waited for the last train of the evening. The platform was slick with rain, and the water reflected the dim overhead lamps, making the space appear infinite. He noticed a figure at the far end of the platform, standing perfectly still, motionless in the downpour. As Alex approached, the figure didn't move or acknowledge him. Yet he felt the unmistakable weight of being observed. A sudden gust of wind blew through the station, carrying the sound of low, almost inhuman laughter. The figure vanished, leaving no footprints, no wet trail, nothing to indicate it had ever been there. Alex boarded the train, drenched and shaking. Yet he couldn't ignore the feeling that the rain had conjured something that followed him, lingering just beyond perception, waiting for the moment he let his guard down. Meanwhile, in a dense forest, a man named Tom had gone out to photograph wildlife during a heavy rainfall. The rain turned paths into rivers, and the trees into a maze of glistening trunks and branches. He moved carefully, camera in hand, when he noticed something odd. A series of footprints, too large to be human, leading off the main trail into a dark thicket. Curiosity overrode caution. He followed the prints, the rain soaking his clothes, muffling every sound except for the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. Deep in the woods, he stumbled upon a clearing where the rain fell harder, the canopy unable to shield him. And there, standing motionless, was a figure unlike any animal he had ever seen. It was tall, its limbs elongated unnaturally, and its face hidden beneath a slick, dripping hood. Tom froze. The creature tilted its head slowly, examining him, and then vanished without a sound. Only the rain remained, relentless, as if it had claimed the forest and everything within it. In a different part of town, a man named Victor was working late at a gas station on the outskirts of the city. The storm had turned the roads into rivers, and customers were sparse. Around midnight, the lights flickered, and the old security camera monitors began to glitch. Victor noticed a shadow moving across the screens, a figure walking among the pumps outside. Though the cameras showed the area empty, he stepped outside, rain immediately soaking his jacket, and saw nothing but the swirling water and the occasional flash of headlights in the distance. Yet, the sensation of being watched was overwhelming. Every droplet of rain that struck his face felt heavy, almost deliberate, as though something unseen was tracing his movements. Victor returned inside, but the monitors flickered again, the figure reappearing, closer this time, just beyond the edge of the camera's view. He realized then that the storm had awakened something that thrived in the rain and darkness, patient and unrelenting. Meanwhile, in a suburban home, a young woman named Emily was home alone during the storm. Rain beat against the windows, each drop a tiny hammer. She had lit a single lamp in the living room, shadows dancing along the walls. Around midnight, she heard the sound of wet footsteps coming from the kitchen. The house was quiet, and she knew she was alone. The footsteps grew louder, approaching the living room. But when she turned the corner, no one was there. The rain outside was relentless, masking any sounds from the street. Yet she could feel the presence in her home. Objects began to move slightly, books sliding across shelves, a lamp tilting, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that her breath became visible in the air. Emily tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't budge. The storm raged, the rain creating a symphony that seemed to mask the entity's approach. She was trapped with something that existed just beyond her senses, something that had been drawn out by the storm, patient and calculated. Rain transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Streets become rivers of reflections, forests become mazes of uncertainty, and rooms in our homes become stages for the unexplainable. It's a medium that amplifies fear, heightening every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat. In all these tales, the rain is both a backdrop and a participant, a relentless force that shapes the experiences of those caught in it. The characters are ordinary, relatable, yet the extraordinary finds them anyway, often without warning, leaving them drenched in fear and disbelief. Shadows twist unnaturally, figures appear and vanish, and the cold, steady percussion of raindrops becomes a metronome for terror. As the night deepened, the storm showed no sign of relenting. Every drop of rain seemed heavier, every gust of wind sharper, every shadow darker. In a small town at the edge of the forest, a man named Henry was driving home after a late shift. The rain had turned the roads into mirrors, reflecting the dim orange of streetlights and the twisted shapes of trees on either side. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. Henry slammed on the brakes, but the figure didn't move. He honked, yelled, but it remained, still and unmoving. A cold dread spread through his chest, every instinct screaming danger. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. No footprints, no sign it had ever been there. Just the rain, relentless and indifferent. Henry sped home, but the image of the figure haunted him. Even days later, he could picture the way the shadow had seemed too human, yet wrong, as if stretched by some unnatural force. Meanwhile, in a forest that had become a favorite hiking spot for locals, a woman named Chloe was returning from a day-long trek. The rain had soaked the trail, turning leaves and mud into a slick, treacherous path. As she made her way down a narrow slope, she noticed footprints, too deep, too wide, uneven, and leading in a strange, winding path that she hadn't taken. Chloe's heart raced. She tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe someone had passed through earlier. But then she realized the prints stopped abruptly, with no trail leading onward. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She looked around, rain plastering her hair to her forehead, shadows stretching unnaturally between the trees. Then she heard it, a low whisper, carried by the wind through the storm, repeating her name over and over. Panic overtook her, and she ran, the rain cutting across her vision, the whispering persisting, growing closer, until she burst out of the forest onto the main road, soaked and trembling, certain she had left something behind, something that had been waiting in the rain all along. At a coastal lighthouse, the storm had intensified to the point that waves crashed violently against the jagged rocks below. Noah, a caretaker who checked the lighthouse during storms, climbed the spiral staircase, rainwater leaking through cracks and dripping down onto the cold metal steps. Each drip sounded like a clock ticking, counting down to an unseen event. At the top, he looked out at the grey, churning ocean, only to feel a presence behind him, a cold, suffocating pressure, as if the storm itself had brought something with it. He spun around, flashlight in hand, and saw nothing. Yet, the hairs on his arms stood on end, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down. As he descended, he noticed the lanterns in the keeper's room swinging slowly, despite the absence of wind inside. The storm roared outside, but inside, something lingered, patient and deliberate, a remnant of fear brought to life by the relentless rain. Back in the city, an elderly man named Walter lived alone on the top floor of a rain-soaked apartment building. The storm had been ongoing for hours, each drop against his window like a drumbeat in his chest. As he tried to read, he noticed shadows moving just outside the corner of his eye, shapes twisting in impossible ways. The lights flickered, and the sound of rain was punctuated by soft tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the walls. Walter tried to ignore it, attributing it to the storm and his imagination. But the tapping grew louder, more insistent, as though demanding attention. Then came the whispers, faint and almost indistinguishable, carried in the wind through tiny gaps in the window. He pressed his hands to his ears, but they persisted, repeating his name, teasing his mind, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. The storm outside reflected the storm within, each drop a reminder that the ordinary world had become a stage for the extraordinary, and that fear could be as tangible as the water soaking his apartment floor. In another town, a group of friends had gathered in an old cabin deep in the woods, hoping to ride out the storm together. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rolling in the distance, and shadows danced across the walls from the single flickering candle in the center of the room. As they played cards and told stories to distract themselves, the sound of footsteps began outside, careful and measured. One friend peeked through a cracked window and saw nothing but sheets of rain and black trees. Then, the doorknob rattled softly, though no one was near it. Panic set in, and the friends huddled together, watching as a shadow passed the window, pausing before moving on. Unseen, untouchable, a remnant of the storm itself. By morning, there were deep, muddy footprints leading away from the cabin, disappearing into the forest. But the friends knew that whatever had visited them in the rain had not left entirely. It lingered in memory, in unease, in the way shadows now seemed to move just slightly when they weren't looking. Meanwhile, in a rural hospital, a nurse named Lila had stayed late, tending to patients as rain streaked the windows and water pooled in the hallways. The old wing had always felt strange during storms, but tonight it was oppressive. Equipment that normally hummed quietly began to malfunction. IV pumps stopped, monitors flickered, and machines beeped in irregular, unsettling patterns. Lila felt eyes on her, though no one was around. Shadows twisted at the edge of her vision, and the patter of rain outside became an accompaniment to the soft, almost human whispers that drifted through the corridors. She tried to rationalize, blaming the storm, fatigue, or faulty wiring. But deep down, she knew this was something else. By the time she finished her shift, the storm had passed. But the weight of what she experienced remained, a lingering terror etched into the quiet spaces of her mind. The final story takes us back to a young boy named Liam, who lived in a small farmhouse on the outskirts of a forest. The rain had been falling relentlessly for days. The kind of storm that turns the world into grey rivers and dark mirrors. One night, as he tried to sleep, he heard something outside. Soft, deliberate tapping at the window, followed by the faint scraping of claws across the wood. His heart raced. He told himself it was just the wind, just branches, but the rhythm was too regular, too intentional. The tapping moved around the house, echoing in the rain-soaked night, always just out of reach. He pulled the blankets over his head, trying to convince himself it was over. But the presence lingered, patient, waiting, feeding off the fear and the storm. By morning, the footprints in the mud outside were too deep, too wide, and ended abruptly, vanishing into thin air as though whatever had come in the night had never existed, leaving only the relentless rain and the memory of terror behind. Rain has a way of exposing the thin line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. It amplifies fear, distorts perception, and isolates those caught in its endless sheets. Shadows stretch unnaturally. Whispers travel farther than they should. And ordinary places, streets, forests, homes, become stages for the unexplainable. Every story we've shared tonight demonstrates the same principle. When the rain falls, it does not merely water the earth. It brings with it the unseen seen, the unpredictable, the inexplicable. Those who encounter it find themselves confronted with a reality that is elastic, terrifying, and utterly beyond comprehension. The ordinary becomes dangerous. Familiar spaces become arenas of dread, and the storm ensures that no one is safe, not truly. Fear thrives in the rain, patient and insistent, and those who encounter it are forever changed. So tonight, as you lie in bed, listening to the rain patter against your windows, consider this. The world outside is not as it seems. The shadows may move when you aren't looking. Footsteps may echo in empty hallways. Whispers may drift through the air, carried by the storm. And while it may be comforting to tell yourself these are just coincidences, just the imagination, remember the stories we've shared. The ones that are true. The ones that leave no room for rational explanation. The rain is more than water. It is a witness, an accomplice, and sometimes a predator. Listen closely, for tonight, it may be whispering your name.